Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Emily and I make videos about books and about beauty. I also have a blog and social media, which will all be linked down below. So today we are going to talk about 10 books that changed my life. So that sounds kind of dramatic. It probably is a little bit dramatic, but if you know me, you know I love to read, and you know I have loved to read for as long as I can remember. I feel like I read a lot more than the average person now, but when I was a kid, I read like an insane amount. I would read every time we were in the car going anywhere. I would read anytime I had free time at home. Even when my mom would send me outside to play, I would take a book and set up a lawn chair and read outside. And I would read anytime I finished my work at school, which I would usually try to finish my work quickly so that I could have more time to read. So I usually had a book in my backpack, I had a book at home, and I had a book in the car, and I'd be reading like 3 books at one time. So I've always loved reading. So today I really wanted to talk about some books that either changed the way that I thought about reading, changed the way I thought about the world, things like that. So I highly recommend all of these. I will link them down below, and I will link them through Bookshop, which is a website you can use to purchase books and support your local independent bookstore. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get into the 10 books that changed my life. Alright, so I don't have all of these books with me here, so I will put a picture up here of the cover if I don't have it with me. So the first book I want to talk about, so it's kind of 2 books, it's 2 series really that changed my life. So it's the Harry Potter series and the Percy Jackson series. So these books I'm not even going to talk that much about because I'm pretty sure basically everybody has read them, and if you haven't read them, you're probably not interested in reading them. Harry Potter is a series of books that apart from, you know, the author and her current controversies and positions, as a child when I read Harry Potter, that was one of the first times I was really so immersed in a world where I would have dreams as if I was a character in Harry Potter. Like I would just read the book all day, finally go to bed when I was too tired to keep my eyes open, and then I would continue the story in my dreams. Like it really is such an immersive universe, and my favorite thing about it is how some tiny little details from the very first books will connect back later in the series. I love when authors do that. It shows that they really had a plan, they had a vision, and as a reader, it's so satisfying to be like, oh, I remember that tiny detail from the first book. So, and that's something that if you've only seen the movies, you really don't get to pick up on, because the movies were made as the books were still coming out. So they really missed out on some of those details because some of them were really tiny things that didn't seem important until they came back up later on. So loved Harry Potter, and the Percy Jackson series didn't come out until later, but I love that series just as much. The follow-up and spin-off series are all on my list of books I really want to read, and I reread Percy Jackson, the main series, this year, and it was so amazing even as an adult. And these books, I remember when I first read The Lightning Thief, I was like, I would get weird looks because I'd be reading on the bus or like while I was waiting for my piano lesson for the person in front of me to be done. And Percy is just like the funniest character ever. He's hilarious. So I would be cracking up, like trying not to laugh out loud and draw attention to myself, but like it's really hard not to laugh at Percy. He's really funny. So these series are just some that I know I could pick back up at any time and still fall into that world and fall in love with it again. All right, the next book I wanted to talk about is Inkheart. So Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. I've read this book a million times, and I've had it for a really long time, and I still never learned how to pronounce the author's last name. But after I read Harry Potter and I loved Harry Potter, I was searching and searching and searching for a fantasy book that would make me feel the same way. After a while, I realized that I don't love fantasy. I mostly just love Harry Potter. But Inkheart was one that really, I loved this book. And again, after this book, I was like, okay, Harry Potter, Inkheart, like I thought that I was a big fantasy lover, but it turns out like I just really like specific books. But this book is about a girl who, her father has the ability when he reads out loud that the story will literally come to life. Like characters will come out of the book and into the real world. And she has to kind of basically save him and learn how to use that ability herself. So it was so magical and so immersive, and as you can see, it is a big book, right? You know, it's for kids, so there's like a couple of small illustrations and the type is pretty big, but you know, when you're in elementary school or you carry around a book like this, people are like seeing you as a serious reader. So it made me feel good about myself as a reader. I loved it, and I loved how central the idea of reading and the magic of reading is to the plot of this book, because it really made me feel like the characters felt the same way about books as I did. So I loved this story, and I want to reread it sometime again in the future. The next book that changed my life is The City of Ember. So I read this one aloud on my Read Aloud channel that I made for my students, so I can link that down below. But this book, I still remember the first time I read it. I don't remember how old I was, but this is probably the first book I ever read that had a major plot twist. Not just like a little surprise, right? But like a big plot twist, which I'm not going to spoil for you if you haven't read it. But I remember thinking about this book for weeks. And like I said at the beginning of this video, I usually had multiple books going at one time. I was always reading different things, but this book just captured my mind for so long. It gave me so much to think about, and I enjoyed the rest of the series, but the original book just does not compare. And this was also definitely the first piece of dystopian fiction I read. It came out in, what year was this published? Let's see. It was published in 2003. So that was way before the big dystopia YA craze. And this is a middle grade book, it's not YA, but I think that having read this, I was really primed for a lot of those other books like the Hunger Games or the Divergent series. And since I had had such a good experience reading this book, I was more willing to try those other dystopias. So this book, absolutely incredible. And I also really loved as a kid, and I still love today, there are two main characters, Dune and Lena. And Dune is a lot more serious, and he, really takes into account the future, and he's just so focused on saving his city. I didn't even give a synopsis. If you don't know, the City of Ember, it's about a city that is always it's the one light in a world of complete darkness, and they've always had everything they need to survive. It's always been, a haven, a wonderful place to live, but supplies are starting to run out, the lights are starting to flicker and maybe go out, and if they run out of light bulbs or the electricity breaks, the whole world is dark, so they don't know what they would do. So of course the characters are two wonderful 12-year-olds, and it wouldn't be a dystopia if you didn't get a job and a career when you turn 12. So it's Dune, who's very serious and really wants to save Ember, his beloved city, and Lena, who's a lot more carefree. She loves to run and explore the city, and their two characters together, I think, make a really wonderful balance. And I just love books where kids have to save the world, and I think that's why I'm so drawn to middle grade novels, is because that's all of them are about adults being stupid and kids have to save the world. Even as an adult, that's one of my favorite tropes. So this book, absolutely incredible, and it blew my little elementary school mind. I cannot stress enough how long I thought about this book and how much I wanted to reread it, and I have reread it so many times. Next up, we have Watership Down. So I know most of my books do not end up being this beat up, but I got this one secondhand, so it's already a little bit beat up, and then, it just kind of got worse from there. So I originally read this book from my school library when I was in middle school, and I loved it so much I had to have my own copy, so I bought a secondhand copy. And this book, it's hard to explain it in a way that sounds appealing, I think, but stay with me. It's basically like a classic adventure tale of, having to uproot your home and move somewhere new, and all of the different people you meet along the way and the adventures that you have, and trying to find your place in the world and find a new home, except the characters are rabbits. So I know that sounds like a little kooky, but oh my goodness, this book is, the world building in here is amazing. There's a whole rabbit dictionary in the back. They pepper in some rabbit phrases throughout, their mythology, their gods, their beliefs. This book is incredible. I basically feel about this how I wanted to feel about Lord of the Rings. It was how everybody told me Lord of the Rings would make me feel, is how I felt about this book. Absolutely incredible adventure, and this is one that I have returned to multiple times because it makes me feel like I have been on a huge adventure when I'm really just reading about fictional rabbits adventuring. So really amazing, highly recommend. It is pretty long, it's a pretty thick, chunky book, and it's got pretty small type, but man, it takes you on a whole journey. Love, love, love this book. All right, the next book I'll put a picture up here is called One Crazy Summer, and this book, I actually didn't, it's a middle grade book that I didn't read until college when I took a children's literature course, and that's one of my favorite classes I took in college. It was amazing. But we read this book, and it really, like, it was so fascinating. It's a historical fiction novel. It's about three girls who live in New York, I think, with their dad and their grandma, but they go to spend a summer with their mom, who they are kind of estranged from, in Oakland, California in the 60s. So if you know anything about history, you kind of know what was going on in Oakland, California in the 60s. And it is just such a, I love middle grade historical fiction. I've read a few historical fiction novels for adults, and for some reason I just don't love them as much as I love historical fiction for kids. And I think that part of what I loved so much about this book is it really made me think about the history I've been taught in a completely different way. So their mother is active with the Black Panthers, and the girls spend a lot of time going to Black Panther, like the Black Panther Party's sponsored summer camp and stuff like that. And I don't know about you, but in my education, we were not told nearly enough or basically any accurate information about the Black Panther Party. I remember being told at some point that they were the black version of the KKK, which is objectively not true. Like, that's just a lie. But even if you were told things that are not outright lies, you probably weren't educated on the Black Panther Party and everything that they did and stood for. Good aspects, bad aspects. You know, did you know they ran a summer camp and provided meals for underprivileged children? Maybe not, you know? So I loved this book because of the historical fiction aspect and about how it made me totally rethink a lot of stuff that I thought that I knew. So highly recommend. I want to purchase a copy and put it in my classroom library, because in addition to just being a great, like, coming of age story about three sisters and their one crazy summer, it has a lot of really interesting historical significance as well. All right, so a lot of the books I've talked about so far, most people have probably heard of, at least some of them. But this next book, I think I'm willing to say most people have not heard of this one. So this book is called The Assault by Harry Mulisch. So I read this my junior year of high school. I went to an IB school and I did the IB program. So when you do the IB stands for International Baccalaureate, when you do that program, your literature class, which in my case is English, obviously, because it is an international program, you're going to take literature in whatever your native language is, but part of that program is that you have to read a certain number of works in translation, so works written in other languages from other cultures, and reading them in, English, because this is from the Netherlands and I do not speak or read Dutch. So we read this in translation, and I know I just said that I don't love historical fiction for adults, but this is an exception. This book changed my life because of the way that the amazing Miss Hodson, my junior year English teacher, had us dissect and read and understand this book. So this takes place during and after World War II in the Netherlands, and it is about a man named Anton, who is the only survivor of the Nazis came and killed his entire family when he was a child. So it is about his life as an adult and about the way that the past kind of creeps into his life and affects him, even as he has tried to put it behind him, change his life for the better, even after the war is over. It's really about those lasting impacts. So it's a wonderful story. It's a great book, but I'll just page through and you can see my annotations. I don't annotate books unless I'm reading them for school, but it's hard for me to put into words how I feel about this book. And I think it's largely because I didn't understand a ton about annotating books. What's the point of it when I could just, make notes in a notebook? But reading this book, we had a project where we each selected a theme from a list of themes. We basically just picked something and we had to track it throughout the entire book. And that was after we'd already read it. So we did an initial read, we talked about it, and then I had to go back, read through, and I think I took a purple highlighter, and I don't even remember what theme I was tracking, and then we had to write about it and present about it to the class. And just, there were probably slightly under 30 people in my class. We all had a different theme that we were tracking, and just hearing from everyone, seeing for myself how that theme traveled through the entire book, how it impacted the story, how it like changed the way I thought about the book, and how it changed Anton's life in the book, and then hearing that from like 30 other people in the class with a totally different theme was really eye-opening to me about how to read literature in a way that's different from just reading for enjoyment. So I read things for enjoyment. That's basically the reason that I read. But the way that we studied this book, I felt like I had such a deep connection and deep understanding of it after doing that project. And I loved everything about studying this book. So Ms. Hodson, thank you. You rock. All right, so what number are we on? Number 7 is, again, sorry, I keep cheating, but this is like, again, 2 books. It's more of like a category of books. So this is Running Out of Time by Margaret Peterson Haddix and Code Orange by Caroline B. Cooney. And really it's about those 2 authors in general. So if you know me and my reading habits now, you probably know that I love fast-paced thrillers, big plot twists, all kinds of stuff like that. So, right, we know that. That had to start somewhere. And I didn't realize until recently that I read a lot of thrillers when I was in middle school. But, you know, because the thrillers I read now are like based around murder or like, you know, husband and wife, like domestic thriller issues, like stuff that's just either not interesting or not appropriate for like a 12-year-old, right? But Margaret Peterson Haddix and Caroline B. Cooney are 2 authors I loved in middle school, and I still love to this day. And they write thrillers that are intense, fast-paced, twisting, turning, right? They're super intense, but they're for younger kids, like middle schoolers. But I think I actually bought Code Orange at the book fair, and that, I don't even remember the plot very much, but I do remember it was like about smallpox. Like, you know how they keep small bits of infectious diseases like locked away in vaults so they could use them, I don't really know what for, government stuff, I don't know, but it was about like a smallpox sample getting out and like what would happen, which at this point in time is like maybe not the best read, you know, with the current situation. But and Running Out of Time was, the plot twist in that one blew my mind. I can't even give you the synopsis because I feel like it would give it away, but anything by Margaret Peterson Haddix especially, just it kept me turning the pages, and it was so fascinating and so interesting. And I think that those thrillers for kids are so underrated. And it took me forever to make the connection that part of the reason I love thrillers now is because I like cleaned out my middle school library's Margaret Peterson Haddix section, and I read every book. Okay, the next book I want to talk about is Sleeping Giants, which is part of the Themis Files by Sylvain Neuvel. I think I'm saying his name right. I loved the whole series. And the reason it's included on this list of books that changed my life is because it really made me learn to love audiobooks. So in the past couple of years, I have gotten so into audiobooks. I usually have one going if I'm showering, anytime that I drive anywhere by myself, if I'm going for a walk. And in college, I didn't have a car, and I lived in a dorm all 5 years of, you know, college and then grad school. And when I was in grad school, my dorm was like in the middle of campus. The School of Education was about a mile this way, and then my student teacher placement was about a mile this way. So I walked a lot, and every time that I walked, I would put in my headphones and I'd be listening to an audiobook. And I also lived alone in an apartment that year, so which can get kind of like creepy, especially, you know, if you're there on fall break and nobody else is in the building. So I would basically always have an audiobook playing anytime I was like walking around my apartment, or anytime I do my makeup, I listen to one. Basically, what I'm saying is I now listen to audiobooks all the time. But for a long time, I just was never interested, or I was like one of those snobs who was like, that's not real reading, which it is. They've like scientifically, you know, seen it lights up the same parts of your brain. But anyway, the Themis Files are told through interviews and like captain's logs and diary entries and like recordings of things. And the audiobooks are full cast, which I love a full cast audiobook. Absolutely adore them. And the format of being told through interviews is so conducive to an audiobook that I think that was Sleeping Giants was one of the first audiobooks I ever listened to. And it really made me hungry for more. It ignited that love of audiobooks that I now have. I don't always listen to full cast audiobooks. I don't always listen to books that are told through interviews or journal entries or things like that I think are more conducive to audiobooks. But I think that those formats really reignite my love for them whenever I listen to one. So I completely credit Sleeping Giants with my love for audiobooks. The second to last book we are going to talk about today is The Book of Embraces by Eduardo Galeano. So this book, as you can see, it's pretty tabbed up with a lot of different colors, but this is another one I read for school. It's another one I read junior year of high school in Miss Hodson's class. And it's another work in translation, although it wasn't part of the IB program. Junior year, you read like 3 different works in translation, and you have to write an essay about one of them that you submit to like the international IB organization. And you also read literature from your like region of the world. So in our case, it's the Americas. So we don't just read like US literature, we also read some South American literature. And Eduardo Galeano, I believe, is from Uruguay. So this book, it's so hard to describe, and it's one that you really have to read and spend time with. And this is one that even if you're not a book annotator, if you read this book, I recommend that you have a pen or a pencil with you to mark it up, because this book made me think so much. It's told in these little vignettes. So they're like, you know, I think the longest one is like 2 pages, but it's got these gorgeous, like quirky, interesting drawings, these vignettes that are just like, this one's like only 1 sentence long, you know? And I've gone through, you see there's like multiple different colors of pen in here, there's like different colored highlighters. I've read this book so many times. This is usually when people ask me what my favorite book is, it's between this one and the next one that I'm going to talk about. But one of my favorite books of all time, and part of the reason that this one changed my life is that, like, you know, that title still feels dramatic to me, but part of the reason this book changed my life is not just that it made me think and it was really powerful to read, but also think back to your high school experience. Think back. Think about those books that you read for English class. And think about how, was there ever a book that every single person in class liked or related to? Probably not. But this book, every single person in class, even if they didn't like the book as a whole, right, found at least one of these vignettes that was powerful to them, that they related to, and that they loved. We did a project about when we read this book where we had to pick 2 vignettes. We could pick any 2, or 3, I think, but I think most people pick 2. We could pick any 2 vignettes from the whole book, and we had to compare and contrast them and do a presentation about it. And I think I learned more about the people in my grade from that presentation than I did from knowing them, you know, for 4 years of high school. Because there are so, like, this book is, let's see, it's like almost 300 pages long. Yeah, it's like 275 pages long. And there are tons and tons of vignettes in here. So you could pick any 2. And seeing which vignettes people compared and what they thought about them really gave me so much insight into my classmates. And it just was fascinating to me how every single person in my class connected with at least one vignette from this book. I loved it. I recommend that everyone reads this. You've probably never read anything like this, but I think that you should. All right, the last book we were going to talk about, I said that when people ask me what my favorite book of all time is, I either tell them it's The Book of Embraces or A Swiftly Tilting Planet by Madeleine L'Engle. So I love Madeleine L'Engle. Shout out to my friend Jasmine for telling me like to read her books when I was in 6th grade. I had read A Wrinkle in Time because like that's a classic and everybody reads A Wrinkle in Time. But Jasmine was like, no, you have to read like the rest of her books. And my middle school library was so stocked with Madeleine L'Engle books. They even had like her original books that had been out of print forever. So I've read almost all of her books. This one I have read over and over and over again. I think I have parts of this memorized. Is how, like, I haven't memorized a book since I was a little kid before I could read, and I would like pretend read the books that my dad read me every night. But this book is so good. It has so many elements that I like. This is one of the sequels to A Wrinkle in Time, so if you liked those characters, you get to know them more here. This one centers on Charles Wallace, and this book has like political intrigue about like a dictator who might be taking over the world. It's got fantasy elements, it's got sci-fi elements combined together. Charles Wallace travels through time on a flying unicorn. It's got historical fiction because he travels through time to like help save the world, so they show up in multiple different time periods. I love alternating, overlapping, interlocking timelines. I love time travel, right? It's got like everything I love, and it's got Charles Wallace, who I love him as a character. And it's got like recurring themes, like how I talked about in The Assault. There's like themes and stuff you could track through here if you wanted. You could do like an academic reading of this book, and I think it would be really interesting. But this story is just absolutely unmatched to me. I think it's amazing, like absolutely amazing. This is my favorite of her books, so like out of all of them, and it is by far one of my favorite books of all time. If you have not read this, I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you're like me and you love that weird mashup of different genres and different elements. All right, that is the top 10 books that have changed my life. I hoped you enjoyed it, and please, please, please leave me a comment down below and tell me if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them, or if you have any books that changed your life that you think I should read. I would love, love, love to hear your thoughts on them. Remember, all of these will be linked down below. Also, all of my makeup is always linked down below, and keep an eye out for more book videos on Tuesdays and more makeup videos on Saturdays. So thank you so much for watching, you guys. Bye.